Welcome, everybody. When I started preparing my session and developing the topic, I thought of a person I really like. And the person I'm talking about is my mom. I love my mom. She taught me so many, wait. Now the joke is even better. I love her. You know, she taught me a lot of things, like brush your teeth, do your homework, clean your room. Yeah, cleaning your room that's crucial to me. I have a problem with cleaning up my room and cleaning up my desk. And as I developed the presentation, I found out my desk and my constitution of cleaning up my room is exactly the same like configuration files and bundles. So you're going to see what I'm talking about in a few minutes. Before that, who doesn't know me, I'm Benkert. I'm working at SymfonyLive Germany, or as we say in Germany, Deutschland. I'm a developer there, doing coding, consulting, and coaching. I'm also organizing the Symfony user groups in Germany with others at the company, but if you want to get started, as Fabien already said, just come over to us, talk to me or talk to my coworkers wearing shirts like these, not with the speaker stuff on it. And yeah, we can get you started. We already have a program where you can get started with a kit where you get badges and stuff like that that you can hand out on your user group. So, and I also organized with others the Symfony Day Cologne events. So if you attended one of these conferences, you might know my face. Okay, but coming back to my topic for today, I'm going to show you what my mom and my thinking of my desk and how clean it is has to do with bundle configurations. And to talk about this, I'm gonna tell you a story. If you come to my home, and that's some people can do that, you're gonna see. If you go to my working room, you're going to see my girlfriend's desk. That's clean. I mean, my girlfriend's going to be a lawyer. It has to be like this. Otherwise, she won't get a job. And if, in contrast, you see my desk, it looks like this. That's bad. But, you know, this desk is the reason why I own a laptop. There's no room on it anymore. But I figured out this is a problem, not because it's unclean, because it depends on configuration files. Because if you look at a configuration file like this, that's pretty common. We open up configuration files like this every single morning. And don't think this is the end of the configuration file. I pasted it and took out some stuff you don't have to see, and it was like 200 lines, 300 lines. The bottom is open. And somebody was so kind to add some of these line breaks to whatever he thinks is structure to bring it to the configuration file. But there's a problem with this. For example, if you have a config.yaml file like this, do you know if this type is correct? Is it an integer, or do I need an integer for this? Or is this configuration block only handling this bundle? If you take a closer look, info_bundle.godmode doesn't belong to tracking bundle, obviously. So who knows if this is only for this bundle? And what about if you have a web service and you want to have multiple connections? Is this possible with this, or is it not? How can I do this? If I need to provide a fallback connection to my web service. I don't know if this is possible here. So what I really want is a configuration file like this. Structured, everything is configured for a bundle, and you don't have such a mess in it. And you don't have such a big amount of parameters in it. So the problem is many people have like so many parameters in it because they haven't really gotten into why a good configuration structure is so important. So my main claim for this is bad configuration is really bad. But one thing I want you to understand is we open up configuration files like this every single day. If our code would look like this, unstructured, coupled, whatever, you would go rampant. You would go to the guy who made this and say, are you serious? This is not the code quality I want. But if we're talking about configuration quality, we are totally different. We're crucifying ourselves every single day with this. And even worse than that is bad validation. If you have, for example, a library that's in your bundle, and you have a string that determines your API URL, and it has to have a backslash, and you don't provide a backslash, what happens? Do you get an exception for this? If not, do you know if the library will react on it with an exception? If not, do you really think the API will tell you, OK, this is bad? So the thing is, if you give your bundles out to other people, you have to make sure that they can use it in the right way. And it kind of is a problem if you don't provide good validation for it. But there's a component for this. The config component is, you already use it when you generate bundles, but not many people, I think, really know what benefit it can bring to you. So, but if you talk about the config component and what the config component does for you, you have, I would say, four main reasons, or four main things it does for you. It locates files, config files. It can load config files. It can validate them, and it can cache them. It can also do a bit more, but just for the session, this is OK. You're going to understand it. We're not focusing on caching for today, because caching is already done for you by Symfony. And if you want to do caching, that's not so hard. And there's already a blog post about this. So if you want to know more, I can hand you out the link for the blog post. And also, we want to focus for the locate and the load stuff at the beginning. So locating and finding a file is one of the basic stuff you want to do when you work with configuration files. So locating a file is pretty easy with the config component. You have the file locator, where you can pass one or multiple resource paths. Damn, that is hard for Germans. And you can use the locate method to actually find out if this file exists. It doesn't find. You can write a locator that actually searches for it, but in the main part, it will only check if the file exists in one of the resource paths. Nothing more. And after it will give you back the path where it found the file. So if you're searching for a config.xml file, and it's available in the path list, you're going to get the path back where it found it. And this, together with a loader, you can use this to load your configuration options from the file to something. You can return it back, or you can use this XML file loader that is bundled by the dependency injection component. And this will use the locator and load the options directly into your DIC. And after it, everything is loaded. That's what happens if you load a servers.yaml or a servers.xml file. And this is actually in your code you are already using for your bundles. So this is your bundle extension class. And as I said before, you can just call the load method, and the file gets loaded. And if you want to load more files, that's absolutely possible. After it, all the other stuff is loaded too. The cool thing about it is you can split up stuff then with this. You can split up services with this. I'm going to show you an example later on it. So as we talked about the basic stuff of locating and loading stuff, we are now going to focus on validating. Because validating is the most important part of the config component for me. So validation is, as I said, is really important because you have to be sure that some options are really the type you're expecting. For example, if you have a library that can't work, or if you don't want to write something about a third-party library that does the validation for you, you can already use the config component for it. Or if you don't use any library behind it that gets configured, you already have the validation. And if you want, for example, have in your config YAML file something like this, on your bundle you want to have the enabled switch, you can do this with pretty easy. First of all, you have your extension class, and you can you have these config options that will be given to you while Symfony starts up, and they are already focused and matched for your bundle only. So you don't get all the other options. You can just focus on your stuff. After they are processed, you have in this config variable, you have the already processed version that is validated and whatever. So after this, you can be sure that everything is validated as you said. And then you can do stuff like this. If your bundle is enabled, include my services, for example. So if you break this down, what the config component mainly does is using a YAML file or whatever config format you want, and convert it to an array. And you can use this array afterwards and do whatever you want with it. Configure your services, or if you don't use Symfony, you can use these config options to set some parameters on your objects and stuff like this. And the config, your configuration needs to be in some structure. And you can define the structure with the config tree. The config tree is pretty straightforward. The API is pretty easy, but you kind of have to know how it works. So if you have your configuration class in your dependency injection folder in your bundle, you have code like this. And in this code, you have, for example, the config tree that you are going to be building. And with this, you have to define a root node. And the root node is your bundle in this example, and that's going to be used for your config YAML file. So if you have, again, this example, you have to say how the structure is going to look like. So the structure is pretty easy to define. We have a Fluent interface for this in the config component. The config tree can be built like this, and you have these simple rules in here. So basically, what you do if you define an option that's going to be in your configuration is you define a node type. In this case, it's a Boolean type. You define a node name. The name is going to be in the config file, and you can provide more options. Like for this example, default false. Default false, yeah. And in this case, if you don't provide this option, it's going to be false. So in this case, your bundle won't be activated or won't be enabled. Talking about nodes is a bit abstract, but we to show you what kind of nodes you can use for your configuration is like this. You have these Boolean configurations I showed you already. You have scalar, and you have an array type. You have a few more, but these are the main types. So if we are focusing on the Boolean again, I can show you a nice example of how validation works. So from my last example, you already know Boolean node with enabled. But what if somebody does something like this? Some people do this, and some people, it happens sometimes. The thing is, if you pass it like this, you're going to get an exception telling you, ooh, this had to be in Boolean, and you passed the string, my friend. So you're going to get a nice exception for this. So validation is based on the types for this. For Boolean types, that's awesome. For scalar types, it's a bit different, because scalar can be many types. For example, if you have a bundle that's defining the timeout you're going to have for your API, for example, or for web requests, you can define something like this. For example, I want a default value of this time. And I want it to be required. And I want it to be that it cannot be empty. I know, required and default value is a bit strange, but just for the example. So you can define multiple things on this. All these nodes bring a rich API of all the different options you can give to your node definitions. And the API is pretty big, so take a look at it. It's really easy, and the config component is not that big. It's not so many files, and if you get how the files work and how they are connected to each other from class view, it's pretty easy to get into this. And what you always should do, that's why I say to all people asking me about stuff like this, you can look into other bundles. Look into the Twig bundle. That's pretty cool for configuration. Or the Doctrine bundle. They're doing crazy stuff. Or look into, for example, the Aesthetic bundle. Also very good. You can look at the bundles that are shipped with the standard edition all the time, and you're going to find out so many things that you haven't thought of already. And others that likely are better developers than you are, hopefully, did this with a reason. So you can just learn from them. OK, so getting back to this, you can use all Scala types, and you have the validation options on this. But what if somebody does something like this? He thinks, OK, I can also pass a string for it, and it's going to be working. That's a problem here. But the config component is pretty smart when it goes to validation that you can define. So if you have your Scala node and you have your options you set already, you can do custom validation. And custom validation is pretty cool. You have this if true method where you can pass a closure to it, and you can use this closure to validate this specific value. And you're going to get the value that's going to be passed by this parameter. So the cool thing here is you can focus on it, or you can do complex validation, or it can be simple like this. So you can put your validation logic in this. And after it, you can, for example, throw an invalidation error, your custom one. So you can provide custom errors. You can be more pushy on this error if you want, or whatever. You can also use the then method. That's not in here, but with this method, you can do, for example, if we are coming back to the example of your API URL, and you forgot to add a slash at the end, you can use the then method to add this slash if it's missing. So you don't have to throw an error to the user because it's obvious what has to happen. And if you do something wrong, you're going to see your error. That's great. So you pushed this validation out of your library, for example, that you have to write, and you don't really have to care about in your library. Your library can focus on the real logic, and the configuration stuff can focus on the validation. But as always, don't overdo it. Don't do all validation in there. So, because when you use your third-party library somewhere else and you have absolutely no validation, things are going to break there. So you can do the minimum validation in your third-party library, and you can do the integration validation in your config for your config classes. The third type is array nodes. Array nodes are a bit special, and you're going to need array nodes for things like connections. If you have a web service, you need these options, and you need these options grouped. And the config components brings array nodes for this, and it's a bit different to work with them, but I think it's pretty straightforward. You have these array nodes you can define, so you can define the group of nodes, and later to this, you can do the specific node definition you need. So after or in the array node, you can do every node type. You can have any node type you want to have. So you can do another array. You can paste another array in there, and you can have Scala nodes, Boolean nodes, whatever you want. And you can you can do all the validation you want. And what it does is it converts to this array. So you get back this array, and you can, for example, give this array as a parameter to some of your classes, or you can use the specific values to pass it to the parameters of your class that's going to be using the web service. And then there's another type of array you're going to need. So if you remember my example of multiple connections, you sometimes have the case where you have a web service that needs a fallback. And in this case, you might want to define multiple connections on this. So it kind of is an in-between what happens now. But you can use this for many things, and multiple connection types is the easiest example in my opinion. You have prototypes on this. So you can imagine prototypes like something that is you're going to give the structure of the type that has to be that can be repeated once, that can be repeated multiple times. For example, if you want this array to be repeated multiple times, you can do a prototype for it, and you can use it multiple times, and the config component will merge this together for you as you define it. So you can do the variations in this, and you can define, under it, you can define, again, all the options as you like. And you can manipulate the key generation. This is a special case. And I really tried to find out why this happens to be like this, what I'm going to show next, but I couldn't find it out. Maybe Christoph can tell me later. And I wanted to be honest on this. I don't really know why passing name, which is not in the, let's go back, which is not in this YAML file, why this works. Because if you pass name, the option you're going to see later, the name default and fallback will going to be the key in your array structures. You can use this on options that exist, and after it, they will be deleted, for example. That is with existing keys. But if these keys doesn't exist, it's going to be, it's collecting the first one. OK, but enough with honesty. You can also do validation on prototypes. Prototypes have their own validations. So if you want to, for example, for connection times, force people to configure at least one connection, you can use this, require at least one element. So you're going to get an error if you don't provide a connection for this. And what you get back is an error like this. Yeah. And you see what I was talking about earlier. I provided name, but name is not in the area, and it was not in the YAML. But what it did is it took the fallback and the default keys and uses it as the keys for the arrays. So as we were talking about validation, you can now, after you validated everything and you brought structure into it, you can use this structure to work with it in your extension classes to, for example, manipulate the DIC or do whatever you want. You can paste variables or whatever. So if you have your extension class and you have your load method, you get back the processed version of the config options. And you can use this. So the enabled option can, for example, manipulate your services in this way that no service is loaded if your bundle is not enabled. You can just load it. What you can also do is you have a kind of normal services that's going to be loaded if your bundle is enabled. And you can also split these services up. So if you have extra services that has to be loaded only for specific reasons, you can set this. You can set this Boolean option, and after it, it's going to be loaded too. And also, you can manipulate the parameters. So if you have in your services YAML parameters for your class, like usernames, API keys, whatever you name it, you can set these parameters instead of using the parameter structure in your config YAML file. So you kind of strip this out of parameters and bring this to your own configuration. So you bring more structure in it. And you can also, yeah, I know this. You can also now have the ability to test your configuration, which is great. I mean, if I remember back the time in Symfony 1 when I wanted to test how configuration behaves on YAML files, it was horror, pure horror. With this, you can test your configuration. You can test your configuration classes, and then be sure that the right errors are thrown or edge cases are covered. So think of this example in your test case. You kind of have to find out how to create a container in your test case, but that is pretty easy if you look in the other bundles. So what you basically need is a container. After it, you can register your extension for it, and only your extension. You can load your extension and pass an array with all the options you want to set. So in this case, you can do for every test you want. You can pass other configuration options, and these other configuration options are going to trigger errors, validation, whatever. And after it, you can call the compile container method, and everything gets loaded. And you can test things. Like, for example, assert if a certain parameter is set to true, or if an exception is thrown, and what the message is. So you have all the options you're going to need for this. OK, so this was a lot of code. And I like to show code, but code is nonsense if you don't believe me. So, and I don't want this to be a make-believe session. So if we want to recap some stuff and want to bring this to a good end, I want to sum some things. So what really is the most important part is that your configuration has to be structural in one way. Otherwise, your configuration gets bloated over time. So treat your configuration like you treat code. Configuration is not like I'm pasting some shit into some config file, and after this, I don't have to look in it anymore. If you do so, and if you have a developer that's coming to your project 1 year after you, he's going to hate you big time. You need validation on some point. You need it. If you don't have validation, things are going to break. And that's the same thing as with the structure. If you have somebody that's coming to your project and doesn't know how he can manipulate config options, he's going to break something. And if that's going to your deployment, good luck. Reverting stuff on big deployments is no fun. And you need some kind of conversion. You need to convert your configuration structure into your classes, into options that has to be set, or something like this. Because your configuration is just an expression of how things are going to work, not an exact duplication of how your code is going to look, of how your classes are going to interact with each other. It's some kind of abstraction. Yeah, and the main thing is the config component is awesome. Just realize it. Or just believe me, I don't know. But taking a look into it, you're gonna love it, I think. And you have to promise me one thing. If you haven't gotten anything out of my talk today, anything, and if you think I'm just a jerk telling you shit, that's fine. But please, in future, don't let your desk look like this. Thank you.